On a sweltering August evening in 2012, the bustling city of Austin, Texas, was abuzz with the excitement of an upcoming election. Governor Jonathan Harper, a charismatic and seasoned politician, was running for re-election. His platform of integrity and reform had made him a popular figure, and he was widely expected to win. But behind the scenes of his seemingly flawless campaign, a dangerous secret was brewing, one that would soon explode into a scandalous tragedy. Jonathan Harper, at 52, was the epitome of a public servant. With a decorated career spanning 2 decades, he was beloved by his constituents for his dedication and unwavering commitment to the people of Texas. His wife, Evelyn Harper, a former news anchor, had stood by his side for over 25 years, and together they were seen as the perfect power couple. Their 2 children were grown, leaving Jonathan and Evelyn to focus on the campaign. But as the election drew closer, Jonathan found himself increasingly distracted. The source of his distraction was Melanie Carter, his campaign manager. At 36, Melanie was known for her sharp political instincts and tireless work ethic. She had been instrumental in Harper's previous victories and was often seen as the force behind his success. But Melanie was more than just a talented strategist. She was also captivating, with a magnetic personality and a striking presence that drew people to her. It wasn't long before her professional relationship with Jonathan took a dangerous turn. Their affair began innocently enough, with late-night strategy sessions that turned into dinners, and dinners that turned into more. By the spring of 2012, they were deeply entangled in a passionate relationship, careful to keep their liaison hidden from both the campaign team and the media. Melanie knew the stakes were high. Any hint of scandal could derail Harper's re-election bid and destroy everything they had worked for. But as with many secrets, theirs was not as well hidden as they believed. Rumors began to circulate within the campaign about the nature of Jonathan and Melanie's relationship. Whispers of closed-door meetings and the governor's sudden absences became more frequent. Evelyn Harper, who had long suspected her husband's infidelity, decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator to follow Jonathan, hoping to confirm her suspicions once and for all. By early August, the investigator delivered irrefutable evidence of the affair. Photos of Jonathan and Melanie at a secluded lake house, intimate conversations recorded from a bug planted in Melanie's car. It was all there, laid bare in front of Evelyn. Devastated by the betrayal, but determined not to let it derail the campaign, she confronted Jonathan in private. They argued for hours, but in the end, she agreed to keep the affair a secret until after the election, on the condition that he end things with Melanie immediately. Jonathan reluctantly agreed, knowing the damage control needed to save his career. He met Melanie in their usual secret location, a small office in a quiet part of downtown, and told her it was over. Melanie was stunned, her face pale as she struggled to comprehend his words. The affair, she insisted, was more than just a fling. She loved him, and she believed he loved her too. But Jonathan, facing the reality of losing everything, remained firm. It was over, he repeated, and they needed to keep their distance. Angry and heartbroken, Melanie left the office in tears, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. She had given up everything for him, her career, her reputation, and now he was discarding her like she meant nothing. As the days passed, Melanie's heartbreak turned to anger. She started drinking heavily, isolating herself from the campaign team. She stopped showing up at meetings, leaving Jonathan to scramble for a replacement in the crucial final weeks of the campaign. Rumors swirled, and the media began to speculate about her sudden absence. But then, on the night of September 2nd, 2012, everything changed. The police received a frantic call from Melanie Carter's apartment complex. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, followed by a loud crash. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Melanie's lifeless body at the bottom of the staircase leading to her apartment. Her neck was broken, and her face was covered in bruises. The scene was chaotic, but it was clear this was no accident. News of Melanie's death sent shockwaves through the campaign and the community. The media pounced on the story, and within hours, the affair between Jonathan Harper and Melanie Carter was headline news. Speculation ran rampant. Had she been murdered? Was it a jealous lover or someone trying to silence her before she could expose the affair? As the investigation unfolded, Detective Laura King, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving high-profile cases, was assigned to lead the case. King, known for her tenacity and sharp mind, quickly zeroed in on Jonathan Harper as a person of interest. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. The affair, the abrupt breakup, and now Melanie's mysterious death. For Jonathan Harper, the nightmare was just beginning. As the election campaign turned into a murder investigation, his once bright future was now shrouded in doubt and suspicion. The perfect life he had worked so hard to build was unraveling, and the consequences would be devastating for everyone involved. Detective Laura King wasted no time in delving into the details of Melanie Carter's death. The crime scene, though chaotic, suggested a violent struggle. Broken glass from a picture frame littered the entryway, and a toppled lamp lay near Melanie's body. The bruises on her arms indicated that someone had grabbed her forcefully. But what caught King's attention was the positioning of the body. Melanie's head was twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide open in a final expression of terror. The autopsy report confirmed what King had suspected. Melanie had been pushed down the stairs, her neck snapping upon impact with the bottom step. The medical examiner noted that the bruises on her neck and shoulders were consistent with an assailant's grip, indicating that she had been shoved with considerable force. This was no accidental fall. It was murder. King began piecing together Melanie's last known movements. Witnesses reported seeing her enter the apartment around 8 p.m. on the night of her death, visibly upset and carrying a bottle of wine. The building's security footage showed her ex-boyfriend, Andrew Collins, arriving about an hour later. A known hothead with a history of confrontations, Andrew had previously been involved in a tumultuous relationship with Melanie that ended a year before she started seeing Jonathan Harper. King brought Andrew in for questioning. He appeared nervous, his hands fidgeting as he recounted his version of events. According to Andrew, he had come to Melanie's apartment to talk after learning about her affair with the governor. He admitted they argued, but he insisted he left before things got out of hand. He claimed that she was still alive when he left her apartment. "Did you push her, Andrew?" King asked. Her eyes locked on his. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I swear I didn't touch her. I was angry, sure, but I'd never hurt her like that." King wasn't convinced. Andrew's temper was notorious, and his alibi was shaky. But as she dug deeper, something didn't add up. His cell phone records placed him at a bar across town shortly after he left Melanie's place. Security footage from the bar confirmed he was there, looking disheveled and agitated, but very much sober enough to be aware of his surroundings. The timeline didn't fit. If he'd left Melanie's apartment when he claimed, he wouldn't have had time to commit the murder and make it to the bar. King reluctantly ruled him out as a suspect. With Andrew cleared, her attention shifted back to Jonathan Harper. The governor had a solid motive. The affair had just been exposed, his political career was hanging by a thread, and Melanie was an unpredictable wild card. But Jonathan insisted he hadn't seen Melanie since their breakup a few weeks earlier. His alibi placed him at home with Evelyn on the night of the murder, a claim she confirmed during her interview, though her eyes avoided King's when she said it. King wasn't satisfied. The case was messy, and something about Evelyn's demeanor didn't sit right with her. Was she covering for her husband, or was there more to the story? The next day, King's team found a potential breakthrough. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured a man wearing a baseball cap and hoodie entering Melanie's building around 9:30 p.m., right after Andrew had left. The footage was grainy, but the man's build and posture resembled Jonathan Harper's. King knew this could be the evidence she needed. She obtained a warrant to search Harper's home and office, hoping to find something that could tie him to the crime. The search of his home yielded nothing, but in his office, they found a pair of gloves stashed in a drawer. One of the gloves had a small, dark stain on it. Forensic analysis revealed it was blood, Melanie's blood. Confronted with this evidence, Jonathan's attorney advised him to remain silent, but King could see the panic in his eyes. The story he had so carefully controlled was unraveling, and with each passing day, more pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The gloves were damning, but King needed more to build a watertight case. She combed through Melanie's phone records, looking for anything that might point to her killer. Late that night, she found what she was looking for: a series of deleted text messages between Melanie and Jonathan from the night of the murder, recovered from Melanie's cloud backup. The messages were heated, with Melanie threatening to go public with their affair, accusing Jonathan of using her and then discarding her. His responses were desperate, pleading with her to meet him so they could talk things through. It was clear that Jonathan had gone to Melanie's apartment that night, desperate to keep her from exposing their affair. But when she refused to back down, he had snapped. The once composed, calculating politician had been pushed to his breaking point. King knew it was time to make a move. She obtained an arrest warrant, and early the next morning, officers arrived at the governor's mansion. Jonathan Harper was led away in handcuffs, his face pale as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The mighty politician, once a symbol of integrity, now stood accused of murder. As the news broke, the city of Austin was thrown into turmoil. The election was postponed indefinitely, and the scandal dominated every headline. Jonathan Harper's downfall was complete, but for Detective King, the job was far from over. She needed to make sure the truth came out in court, that justice was served for Melanie Carter. With Brian's confession in hand, Detective Manning knew she had enough to arrest him for Alicia's murder. But the case wasn't as airtight as she needed it to be. Brian's confession was full of vague details and half-truths, and without a clear motive for murder, the defense could argue it was an accidental death. Manning had to prove that Brian had intended to kill Alicia that night. She returned to the lab, where Dr. Collins was waiting with the results from the bloodstain found on Brian's shirt. "It's Alicia's," Dr. Collins confirmed, "but it's not just a smear. The pattern suggests he was holding her close when the blood transferred. This wasn't just a quick struggle." Manning's mind raced. The pattern indicated a more prolonged, intimate contact, suggesting that Brian held onto Alicia even after she was injured. It hinted at intent, but still, she needed more. She decided to take a different approach and revisited the recovered footage. She had it enhanced as much as possible, looking for anything that might have been missed earlier. That's when she noticed it, a subtle detail. As Brian exited Alicia's room, he wiped his hands on the side of his pants. It was a small, almost imperceptible action, but it showed something significant. Brian had been aware of the blood on his hands and had tried to get rid of it. It indicated consciousness of guilt. Armed with this observation, Manning interrogated Brian again, focusing on his behavior after the murder. She knew he had tried to clean up, but why hadn't he reported the death? Why had he lied so extensively if it was just an accident? Brian, now visibly distressed, stumbled over his words. I was scared," he repeated. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to stop her from ruining everything. I didn't think. I just acted. But you didn't try to help her, did you?" Manning pressed. "You didn't call 911. You didn't alert anyone. You tried to cover it up and then walked away. You knew exactly what you were doing." Brian fell silent, tears welling up in his eyes. Manning continued, "You realized what you'd done, and instead of helping, you chose to save yourself. That's not an accident, Brian. That's murder." Brian broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. His lawyer, seeing the case collapse before him, asked to end the interrogation. But the damage was done. Brian had revealed enough for Manning to solidify her case. As the prosecution prepared for trial, more evidence surfaced. A forensic sweep of Brian's car revealed traces of blood in the trunk lining, suggesting he had considered moving Alicia's body before deciding against it. The stain was faint, but it was enough to prove premeditation. The trial was swift. The prosecution painted Brian as a man caught in a web of lies and deceit, desperate to protect his reputation and his family. They argued that Alicia's threat to expose the affair was the final straw. pushing him to kill her in a fit of rage. They presented the blood evidence, the surveillance footage, and his inconsistent statements, constructing a narrative of a man who had planned to silence Alicia permanently. Brian's defense team tried to argue that Alicia's death was an accident, the result of a moment of uncontrolled passion. They portrayed Brian as a man who had lost his way, who had made a terrible mistake, but had not intended to kill. But it wasn't enough. The evidence was overwhelming, and Brian's demeanor on the stand did little to help his case. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Brian was sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, he slumped in his seat, the weight of his actions finally crashing down on him. For Detective Manning, the case was closed, but the echoes of the tragedy lingered. Alicia Turner, a young woman full of life and promise, had died because of a man's selfishness and fear. Brian Walsh, once a respected pilot, now faced the consequences of his deadly choices. In the aftermath, the airline community was left reeling. The scandal had exposed the dark underbelly of what was once seen as a glamorous profession. Alicia's fiancé, Mark, devastated by her betrayal and death, left Chicago, unable to bear the memories. Brian's wife, faced with the reality of her husband's double life, filed for divorce and moved away with their children, seeking to rebuild their lives far from the shadow of his crimes. Manning filed away the case with a sense of grim satisfaction. She had gotten justice for Alicia, but at a steep cost. As she stood in the hallway of the precinct, watching Brian being led away in handcuffs, she couldn't shake the feeling that, in the end, everyone involved had lost something that could never be regained.